Right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. 7 o'clock, and 7 o'clock it is, or just about. I think we will start streaming in about a second's time from now. I must say, this really is a setup for authority-based medicine, isn't it? I mean, you feel very grand up here. I'm sorry, do I need to make this a bit louder? Are you finding it a bit hard to hear? Is that any better? Yes. Good, okay. Most of us here, of course, are either too young to remember 30 years ago or too old to remember 30 years ago. And for all of us, it's rather dazzling being allowed out for the night. So it's a very special occasion in that sense too. But a very, very happy birthday to HealthWatch. Before I introduce David, let me tell you a little bit about HealthWatch for those of you who don't know the history. Some people here were here right at the beginning in 1991. I know Keith Isaacson has not been able to be here because he is sheltering. We were sold out, incidentally, about twice over. So it's either people have been pinged or it's rather unfortunate we've got 8 or 9 empty chairs here, which is a shame because we could easily have given those away as well. Anyway, for those who don't know the history, I will be brief. 30 years ago, it was inspired by an oncologist, Professor Michael Baum, who was a breast cancer specialist, and he was dispirited, I think is the right word, by seeing so many patients coming to him with suppurating sores, some of them now terminally ill, who had not seen a proper doctor for years because they had been seeing alternative practitioners. And he said something must be done about this. And he urged that we should set up an organization, which indeed we did, to fight pseudoscience and downright charlatans. The fact is that quacks don't just prey on the worried well, they prey on the worried sick as well. And in this case, on the terminally sick. I went to see Professor Baum, and he introduced me to some of his patients, and I very soon became dispirited, more than dispirited actually, angry that people were now destined to at least an appalling quality of life, which might have been avoided, and almost certainly a premature death, because they'd been diverted from proper medicine. And so we started the Campaign Against Health Fraud. Now, it was a great title. The problem was, well, the reaction was fast and furious. We were denounced, first of all, as a front for the pharmaceutical industry. And I think even the Charities Commission was itself embarrassed that we were criticizing some of the charities which it itself was responsible for. Eventually, we were persuaded to change our name from a campaign to something much more benign, HealthWatch, which is actually quite a good name, so much so that the Department of Health 8 or 9 years ago decided to take it for themselves, since it hadn't occurred to us that we needed to copyright our own name. So now we're looking for a new name. We're not quite sure what, perhaps the Society of Evidence-Based Healthcare or whatever, but that's for the future. Let me go back again to the past. I've just been reminded by somebody who's here for the first time. He was saying, what are the advantages of joining? To which I had to answer, none. Right from the start, we decided we would not become a mass membership organization. We looked at those that were, and we looked at those that weren't. We looked at influential and those that weren't influential. And we decided that the numbers of members had absolutely nothing to do with it. When we started, we had some pretty big names and a clutch of Nobel laureates, and we decided that was good enough for us. And we've never really tried to grow the organization beyond that size. But we have made alliances, and some very powerful alliances where necessary with the Royal Colleges, particularly with Sense About Science, sometimes with the Royal Institution and the Royal Society. We have also extended our reach in many other ways through various joint campaigns. I'm not going to go into those, but the big question we're left with after 30 years is, what have we achieved? Well, we have achieved, whether it's us or whether it's the zeitgeist, whether it's us in combination with others, we have achieved some things. There is no more a Royal Homeopathic Hospital on the NHS. And indeed, quack treatments on the NHS have largely been phased out. I can't think that any actually that haven't been eclipsed at the moment. And some of our achievements can be measured by what hasn't happened. there is not a Prince Charles system of what he calls integrated medicine, where you integrate evidence-based medicine with evidence-unbased medicine, and sometimes with medicine where the evidence goes actually against it. But as our annual Health Watch competition brings home very vividly every year, doctors and nurses are still not trained even in the basics of bullshit. We hold a competition every year and we ask them to look at some papers and find some obvious flaws. Should we believe them or should we not believe them? And it's extraordinary. Even those who think they're very good at this sometimes don't spot basic bullshit. The Royal College of Nursing has told us, oh, it's just too difficult. We've just got too many things to teach our students. Really, we can't expect them to know what's true and what isn't true. And actually, the same is true of many medical deans as well. They are teaching what they think is a practice. The theory gets in the way of that, or they just don't have the time for it. And sadly, we don't have much success in persuading Britons as a whole that there is a difference between evidence when it comes to medicine and evidence when there isn't. I look at all these ads on the tube for potions and pills that remind me of Victorian England, and most of them will do nobody any good. They're going to wee them straight out, but they spend literally, I was astonished, I can't remember how many billions, it is billions in this country on these things. And we haven't managed to persuade the whole of the human species either that things aren't always what they seem to be, that the lived experience and the anecdotes can be misleading, and that authority-based medicine is really often out of date and often just authority-based and not based at all on whether people get better or not. Or that so-called complementary and alternative medicine, incidentally, so-called complementary and alternative medicine, SCAM, and I noticed that Professor Edzard Ernst, who was appointed to be the world's first professor of complementary alternative medicine, now calls it SCAM, having started as a trained homeopathist and looked at the evidence and now come so heavily against it. It's almost always irrational, it's almost always a waste of money, and it's frequently a fraud, and sometimes downright dangerous. It's difficult to carry this last message because real medicine is certainly downright dangerous, because it's potent. It actually works. And so if you're up against a homeopathist and you're trying to talk about the dangers of homeopathy against a surgeon who's proposing to do some invasive treatment on you, fair dues, giving somebody water is probably going to be safer for them than giving them a major bit of surgery. But of course the outcomes are what matters. And it's outcomes that really should matter to patients, and that's where we still have such an uphill struggle. Why haven't we won that struggle decisively? The answer, as everybody knows, is that's the way the humans are wired. We are, after all, apes, albeit great apes, but we are apes, and we are designed not for a world of universities and a world of complex statistics and formulae. We are designed for a much more basic existence where sometimes our decisions have to be made instantly, and they're life or death, or would have been life or death. We're hardwired for immediacy. And that's why when we touch a stove, a hot stove, and it burns us, we learn never to touch that hot stove again. Unfortunately, if the consequences are years in the future and are probabilistic rather than certain, we're not so good. So if I steal something from a shop and there is a 1 chance in 60 I might be caught, and then there's a 1 chance in 5 that I might be taken to court, and then there's a 1 chance in 2 that I might be punished for it, it's probably not a very, very good deterrent, even though most people think it is. If I smoke a cigarette and there's a possibility that it might injure me or kill me many years ahead, indeed will injure or kill 2/3 of those who do it, but many years ahead, it takes years for people to be persuaded, I mean literally decades after Richard Dole proved how dangerous it is. It's this hard wiring that makes it so difficult to get a complex message across when a simple message is so much more digestible. And that is where our speaker comes in, because over the last 30 years, we have had some pretty fantastic speakers, doctors, scientists, journalists, statisticians, who've helped us explain this human reluctance to think the hard way round rather than the easy way round. But nobody is as well qualified as David Spiegelhalter. Now, I'm not going to rehearse his CV. You're here because you all know about David, and you all know he's a great speaker, which is why he's here. But it's his job that I find equally exciting. The idea that there should be a professor of public understanding of risk. It's such a brilliant idea. I wish I'd thought of it myself. I wish I'd raised the money for itself. But if I had, I couldn't think of anybody who could do the job better, who could fulfill its aims better than he does. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor David Spiegelhalter.
Nick, thank you very much indeed, and thank you all for turning up. It feels like, such an exciting occasion to go through the tube and go to a real place and come in through the door and see real people. I mean, I never thought that this would seem such an adventure. And actually, to give a talk in long trousers, it's the first time I've done it for ages. So this really is strange. Okay, so what I'd like to talk about today, that's me. Correction. Evidence here. I've retired from being Professor for the Public Understanding of Risk. I was, which is great, and now, I've got an even more ridiculous title. I'm Chair of the Winton Centre for Risk and Evidence Communication, which is a great body, a group of people, again supported by the same benefactor, David Harding, and it's largely psychologists and communication people to work on exactly the sort of stuff that Nick was talking about, and which I'm going to talk about, which is about communication. I'm not going to talk about the construction of the evidence or anything. I'm going to talk about the messaging, the storytelling around the numbers. I'm also, and this will give you a good chance to attack me if you want, a non-executive director of the UK Statistics Authority, which oversees the census and the Office for National Statistics and all those people that are churning out the data that we look at every week. Okay, and of course, a talk wouldn't be a talk unless one plugged one's book, and this will be the 800th COVID book to come out this year, by which time it's coming out in September, by which time I'm sure everyone will be fed up with them. But this one will be really good. This is the one that explains the numbers. And there's two books I can plug, Art of Statistics, and this is my popular book on stats. And it's sold very well. I mean, you've got to look on the bright side of a pandemic. There's nothing better than a good pandemic to sell stats books, I must say. It's not all gloomy. Okay, so in that book, that final book, I use this quote from Nate Silver, who wrote this book, Signal and the Noise, excellent book on baseball betting and everything to do with probability and statistics. And he had this lovely idea that he says the numbers have no way of speaking for themselves. We speak for them. We imbue them with meaning. And I use this in all my talks. I was giving a school's talk this morning, and I use this slide. Because what it tries to communicate is the fact that the numbers are not enough. You can't just produce numbers and expect people to say, oh, thank you very much, thank you, now I understand. No, numbers have to be embedded in a context, in a story, and there has to be a narrative around them, in order to see what their value is. So, every day, this is, that was 3 o'clock this afternoon. This is the sort of dashboard, excellent dashboard. I'm going to try to give credit where it's due. The Public Health England dashboard, the team behind this, I think are fantastic. They've done a great job. They're always innovating, always putting new stuff up. And this is what's there today, is a simple summary on people's desks. Boris Johnson has now got a dashboard on his desk. Amazing. Because number 10 has got a data science unit that's been set up, and they're doing some really good work. Okay, so here we see, wow, okay, somebody could try to, ask me about, I haven't got a clue. I'm just going to preempt that, because everyone's going to ask, well, why is that coming down? No idea. Right, okay, so that's got that over with. And deaths are going up slowly, hospitalizations are going up, but much slower than they did before. It's all, things are happening all the time. Every day there's new stories. fantastic, successful vaccination rollout in this country. Okay, so, but it's been a very busy time. You know, I'm a statistician, I'm retired, I was going to have a nice gentle retirement, you know, doing my stained glass and walking with the dog, and then this damn COVID came along, and suddenly everyone wants to talk to a statistician, and you've got to take the consequences. If you're going to put that, I mean, this is a warning, I suppose, to all scientists. If you're going to put your head above the parapet, you have to be ready for what's going to come at you. You know, people will attack you. So here's me on Andrew Marr last week, doing my little bit. It's very strange when you do TV. He can see me, I can't see him. I'm doing all of that to a little green dot at the top of the screen. I've no idea what he's doing, or whether he's making any faces or falling asleep or what. You know, all you do is hear this voice coming out. And so what do I get after this on Twitter? Well done, you've just put people off getting, you know, put back people getting vaccinated by listening to that idiot David Spiegelhalter. You never question his findings, which are completely wrong. Right, thank you very much. Okay, so that's the sort of stuff one gets a lot. Fortunately, not a lot of retweets, I noticed, but there's some, yeah. So this is what, I'll give you an even better one later of the sort of stuff that one gets. Okay, it's been a busy time, and I am a non-exec on the ONS for the UK Stats Authority, so I may be biased, but I think that the statisticians and the public health organisations have done a great job. The people working in them. I'm not saying the politicians, but the professionals working in those groups, I think, have done a fantastic job. From my perspective, there's a huge demand from the media, from experts. Every damn morning you turn on every radio program, every TV program, there's some scientist, professor, this, that, and the other, sticking his head up, gobbing away, and saying what he thinks. There's been brilliant work by the UK Science Media Centre. I don't know if you know about that, but it's an organisation that puts scientists in touch with the journalists. We get those stories before they're published, under embargo, the same time as the journalists get it. And we can either rubbish them, which we do if we want to, or say they're great and provide quotes. I would say I don't know how you feel, but most journalists, particularly the specialist journalists, have acted very well. I think they've really risen. I mean, I could mention some names. I think, you know, so on the BBC, Financial Times team, John Murdoch and others, you know, The Guardian, even the Daily Mail, full of stats, and a lot of it is good. Yeah, they've done very well. Excellent work by fact checkers that I'll profile later. But it's tricky, and this is something I'd like to emphasise, to remain non-aligned. Media love to split and blame and you know, get arguments going. And there's a constant need to say, oh, I don't do that, I don't know. Like, you know, it's lovely, you know, the drop in cases. Press Association mailed me a couple of days ago, oh, why do you think this is happening? So I have no idea. You'll have to wait and see. And they didn't use that quote, so that's all right. Yeah. And we've even written an article with Kevin McConway on, you know, if you're a professional statistician dealing with the media, some lessons. It's a good lesson. Sound human is the first one, you know, vaguely. Don't gabble jargon. Be prepared. And I won't go through all of those, but, you know, these are our list of lessons. Make friends with journalists, number 5. Number 3, beware of just a chat. Whoa, never have just a chat with a journalist. They're recording every word and they're going to use that one line where you slipped up and went all casual. So never have just a chat. Get a critical friend, and finally, you'll get things wrong. It will go wrong. It goes wrong all the time. And you just got to pick yourself up, try to ignore the criticism, and get going again. So, and we've got, you know, been training people, a lot of more people getting out there and doing this as a whole scheme within the Royal Statistical Society of RSS ambassadors to get out there and act and put your head above the parapet, because I think the public deserve and need what I call non-aligned scientists. And I'll come back later to what I mean by that. Okay, so we get the usual problems with the media. They're hopeless with denominators. As soon as they see a percent, they go all to pieces. This is the great one. You know, COVID-19, only 0.005% of coronavirus deaths have been children. No, that's complete. I don't know what the number is, but it's completely wrong, because what it is that only 0.005% of children with the virus have died. So the denominator is not coronavirus deaths, it's children with coronavirus. In other words, they got a very low death rate. I mean, it's just, and that was the sub-editor. You know, just the sub-editors who write the headlines, the journalists don't write the headlines, that's why I didn't put the journalist's name up there, it's not fair, because he wrote a perfectly good article, and then some idiot sub-editor sticks a completely inappropriate headline on it. They're just hopeless. Anyway, and there's of course been awful things on social media. I'm going to talk on the whole about mainstream media, and I'm not going to talk about all the anti-vax propaganda going around on social media. I will if people ask me, but I just can't bear it. Awful stuff on social media. This is my favourite. Toby Young. What? Oh, no, this is being recorded, isn't it? Okay. Control the language. Toby Young, to whom I do not have enormous respect as to his mathematical ability, shall we say. This is lovely. New studies suggest that more than 5 million Britons have had the coronavirus. Correct. Given that 50,000 people have died from it, correct. This means it has an infection fatality rate of less than 0.1%. Wrong. That's roughly the same as seasonal flu. Wrong, because he can't do the sums. If you do 50,000 out of 5 million, you get 1%, not 0.1%. So he totally destroyed his own argument. He's been arguing for 6 months that COVID was just as dangerous as flu. He thought he'd found the statistics to prove that, and by doing so, he showed he was totally wrong the whole time. Completely unembarrassed by that. 50,000 for 5 million is 1%, not 0.1%. The fatality rate for people, on average, across the whole age distribution, was about 1%. Now it's a lot less because of all the vaccines. Okay, so that's what we get on social media. And people will copy that and retweet it. How many times? 2,000 replies, 600 retweets, 2,000 likes. It's all complete bollocks. Oh. Okay. But die-hard skeptics of that variety have actually had very limited mainstream media coverage. It's been burbling away on social media all the time, and they get lots of retweets among that particular coterie, but actually in terms of the mainstream coverage, it's very limited. You got some, Mike Eden back in October was getting some stuff from the Daily Mail, but actually not that much. This is all nonsense, of course, but he dropped out of the race in a way, and there was some coverage, but really not much, which is very reassuring. Okay, I'd like to go on to the idea of pundits speaking outside their expertise. And for this, I'm going to speak about Lord Sumption, ex-Supreme Court judge. I don't know if you heard his interview on the Today programme last week, July the 20th, where he made 3 statements. The virus has not killed over 100,000 people, he denied. They would probably have died the people who died would probably have died within a year after anyway, and the number of people who have died who had a sufficiently serious comorbidity to appear on the death certificate is very small. It's a matter of hundreds and not thousands. All of these are totally wrong. Why does he feel entitled to get up and spout these untruths, because that's all they are, on an absolutely mainstream radio programme to millions of people in the morning? And of course, why wasn't he challenged at the time? I was on PM later, World at One, demolishing these, but Full Fact, excellent fact-checking organisation, had already got there. Within hours, they'd destroyed them. And really good. On the day, same day, there they were. Actually, up to this year, 124,000 people have died with COVID as the underlying cause of death. Not dying with COVID on the death certificate, but as the underlying cause of death. So that was wrong. People dying of COVID, have lost more than a year of life. They've lost about a decade on average. Now, I quote that, and it has been disputed because people are dying of COVID. Often 90% do have underlying health conditions. COVID does not pick people who've been completely healthy. What COVID does, it picks on any vulnerability you have and exaggerates it. It essentially takes the normal risk anyone has and pumps it up. So if you have any vulnerability for any reason, it'll hit it really hard. It's a real bully. It's really nasty. But but again, 90% of people have got something else on their death certificate, but 10% haven't. So there have been 15,000 death certificates, not hundreds, 15,000 with nothing else on the death certificate except COVID, just in England and Wales. So this, I feel, is more than just the really bizarre anti-vaccine stuff on social media. The fact that misinformation is appearing in that mainstream media is very bad, but there hasn't been that much of it. I can pick on him because it actually is not that common. It is fascinating what's gone on. I mean, this is the graph. This came out this morning from Office for National Statistics. I could give an entire lecture on this graph. The black line, this is deaths since the start of last year. The black line is how many deaths were registered over the last 5 years, so essentially that's the normal. There's the first peak going up. There's quite a lot of green above the black line. These are excess non-COVID deaths. Almost certainly people did have COVID and it didn't go on the death certificate because they were in care homes, weren't seen by the doctor. And then in the second wave, great big spike of COVID deaths. But look, the green line, non-COVID deaths, is running below average. And now we've got it just about back to normal again. This deficited deaths has gone back to normal. Now, the crucial thing is, and this is where Sumption's argument is interesting, is that is this deficit just these people who died would have died a year later? Because there definitely is some what's called mortality displacement. There's fewer non-COVID deaths because some of them died a year earlier in the first wave. And that's absolutely true, that's the case. But it's not just that, and that doesn't explain what's been going on. There's a huge number of excess deaths, slightly less than the actual number of COVID deaths, and one of the reasons for this is there's been no flu. This is my favourite graph. This is COVID hospital admissions, that is flu hospital admissions. Have you ever seen a graph like that? That is hospital admissions for flu over the winter. None. It means we quite possibly could be completely buggered in this winter coming up, but never. But so I've never had a flu jab before, but I'm going to get it this year. So that will have saved 10 to 15,000 lives that would otherwise have died. The lockdown has saved 10 to 15,000 lives over the winter, probably. Which I mean, I'm not saying that's great. We should always have a lockdown every winter. But it has. Okay, so I'd like to just finish off by talking about trust, which seems to me absolutely crucial in all this. And whenever the word trust comes up, you have to go back to Honora O'Neill. She did these fantastic Reith lectures on trust, 10 years ago, more, 2002, I think. Brilliant. And she's wonderful. I'm terrified of her because she's so clever. Because she's a philosopher, and she's a real real roll your sleeves up philosopher. She says stuff that you can use. She's, and one of her great, I shouldn't call them sound bites, but her great summaries is to say that organizations should not be trying to be trusted. Because we all want to be trusted. Experts want to be trusted. They shouldn't be trying to increase trust. She's a philosopher of Kant. Now, I've never read any Kant. Have you tried? Anyway, I've never read any Kant. But apparently, Kant is all about duty ethics. You've got a duty to do things. So she says there's a duty to demonstrate trustworthiness, which is a brilliant switch of the responsibility from the audience to trust you to earn it, to demonstrate trustworthiness. It's so powerful. And it's just, whoa, it really hits you. And it's amazing what a simple switch of responsibility this creates. And she has had a huge impact. The Code of Practice for Statistics, a very important document, not perhaps the most riveting, recommended for bedtime reading if you suffer from insomnia, but never mind. It's great. It's really important. And their first pillar is trustworthiness. So the first, most important thing for official statistics in this country is to be trustworthy. Okay, what does that mean? They give lots of lists about what that might mean. We've, in our Winton Centre, we've been trying to, everyone loves lists and little checklists. So we've been trying to codify what that might mean in an era like this, where you're trying to communicate complex evidence. And we've got it down, there's sort of 5 things that we've been pushing. The first is that you should be trying to inform people, empower them to make informed decisions rather than manipulate them to do what you want them to do. Number 1. And if you do want to manipulate them, be honest with yourself that you are just advertising. It is propaganda. Just own up and do it. But so many people say, oh, we want to inform people so that they will do X. Of course, with vaccines, it's quite tricky because maybe you just want people to get vaccinated. Balance but not false balance. Show the positives and the negatives, but don't pretend they're equal. In other words, don't get Lord Sumption onto the Today programme. So disclose uncertainties, be upfront, and the quality of evidence. Be upfront if the evidence isn't very good. If your statistics are pretty unreliable, I really believe in star ratings for quality of evidence. So you really can say, well, this is what we've got. It's not that great. It's best we got at the moment. We hope to do better later. And the other one is pre-bunking misinformation. And I believe in this, although I'm going to talk, I'll just come on to what I think was not a great success. Get in there hard. If people are spreading misinformation, get in there hard and counter it and tell people it even before they hear it. Do you know there's people going around saying that vaccines make you infertile, blah, blah, blah. Get in there hard. And good, randomized evidence that this can be effective. Now, we tried a couple of these things. First of all, when, I don't know if you remember back in April, Jonathan Van Tam, trusted communicator, cool guy, used our slides that came out of our centre to actually tell people under 30s that they shouldn't get the AstraZeneca vaccine because of the risk of blood clots. And it's a complex argument, which may have changed now because of how common the virus is. It's changed now because we produced these slides. We produced them for Jonathan, and then he used them. We thought they would redraw them, but they went straight into the press conference. And the idea here is that for low exposure risk, this is what it was like back in March, for the benefits of the vaccine in terms of intensive care admissions, for people my age, huge, big benefits, and much less for 20 to 29-year-olds because they're not very rarely go into intensive care. But the risks go up as you get younger. These clots are more common in the younger people. So you've got these counteracting things that at some point it flips over, and they decided then it flipped over at 30. Then later they decided it flipped over at 40. It would be quite reasonable now to go back onto that because we're not at low, we're at high exposure risk at the moment for young people. So things have totally changed. It depends on how much virus is around, because the risks of the vaccine stays the same, but the risks of what happens of exposure go up as the vaccine goes up. So they used that, and that was our attempt to show balance. It wasn't telling people you've got to get vaccinated. It was saying these are the balance of harms, and this went down very well. This is an example perhaps that didn't go down so well about pre-bunking misinformation. And this is the fact. This was the data, it's changed now a bit, but up to June the 21st, showing that if you look at the over 50s and deaths with the Delta variant, up to that point, there'd been 38 among unvaccinated people, but 50 among the people with 2 doses, and 18 among the ones with more doses. More deaths among the vaccinated group than the unvaccinated group in older people. So, and that was the official data. Now, why is that? No, so we wrote an article, why most people, I think we were the first to address this question and try to answer it, to preempt the inevitable misunderstanding of people saying, oh, that's why vaccines don't work. More people, the vaccinated are dying at a higher rate than the unvaccinated. So we were trying to preempt that by getting in there and saying, to explain why most people who now die with COVID have had a vaccination. This is not a bad sign, it's exactly what you would expect. Anyway, and there's been countless articles since then trying to explain this. I think we failed. We got picked up by vaccine skeptics using our article to say how dangerous vaccines were, because they only used the top title and not the subhead, where we said, this is fine, this is not just what you'd expect. So, I still believe it's the right thing to do, to preempt misinformation. You have to take some hit. Whatever you say will be manipulated, but it's best to get it out there honestly rather than be on the back foot and reacting. I still believe that. This got on one of our favourite replies. David Spiegelhalter, anti-masters, and the entire lying, genocidal editorial board and management apparatus of The Guardian should be hunted down and destroyed for crimes against humanity, period. Isn't that cool? I mean, I'm an old white man. I'm not, female or black or young. I don't get threats on the whole. So that was quite a good threat. In fact, I think they're banned from Twitter now. I didn't report them, but people did, as a threat. But we tried to, well, how do you respond to that? We made fun of it. Oh, that seems a bit harsh. I thought it was a good article, my co-author said. And I said, yeah, perhaps a bit harsh, but I've seen worse referees' reports. And then this led to more, a whole Twitter stream. Chris Chambers said, an imaginary reply from the editors of a journal saying, thank you for the opportunity to consider your manuscript. Referee 2 notes that you are genocidal and should be destroyed. As sympathetic as I am to this argument, I'd like to see a revision before making a final judgment. So, in a way, because I don't feel personally threatened, I can make a joke out of it. But not everyone feels the same way. Okay, just to finish off, this article came out yesterday. I think it was yesterday. COVID media must rise above pitting scientists against each other. Dealing with the pandemic requires nuance. And I tweeted out today that I thought they got it all wrong. Why blame the media? Shouldn't this be scientists should rise above polarized policy debates? Instead of blaming the media for pitting scientists against scientists, shouldn't the scientists not agree, not have these strong arguments about what should be done? Because if you do, well, you expect to be argued with. Don't expect to get away with it just because you're professor this or something or other. If you're going to start telling people what to do, you've got to be prepared to take the hit. So I feel very strongly that mainstream media have in general done a reasonable job at trying to fend off misinformation. Scientists have tried hard to explain, but some, I'm not going to mention any names, have become advocates for policy. And that's fine if you're representing a named organisation. It's fine if you're speaking as an individual, but this is not part of being a professional scientist. You are not speaking on behalf of science if you advocate a particular policy, because that's not our job. So I feel very strongly that this polarization with scientists taking policy viewpoints has been one of the worst things of this pandemic, and if anything, more harmful than the misinformation campaigns that have been around. Okay, so that's my conclusion. Just to finally finish off, be careful speaking to the media. I did an interview with the Today programme before Christmas when everything was in a bit of a mess and we might have to close down and, to shut down. And I was saying, well, there've got to be more precautions. I can't sing in my choir anymore. And, then I said, oh, maybe they should ban arguments over the Christmas table, because shouting at each other in a small, unventilated space is one of the worst things you can do. So this was a joke. In the Daily Express, Christmas warning, families could be banned from arguing to prevent COVID spread, according to a leading British statistician. And I thought, yes, here's the result. This is the sort of media influence I want. So thank you very much indeed.
David has agreed to take questions. If I may, David, I just want to ask you one myself about where we and where you should be diverting or focusing your energies. I mean, I'm interested that you had this Twitter troll, Charlotte, and you bothered to respond. And maybe we should be doing that as well, I don't know. And then you've got people like Lord Sumption, who turns out to be a bullshitter. And incidentally, if I'd been sent down by Lord Sumption or had a case go against me, I wonder if I should have it reopened on the basis that he was probably a bullshitter on the bench as well. Or was he? We talk about convictions in law, and we forget that lawyers, of course, have convictions of their own, just like everybody else, and are biased. And so many people have convictions. Should we be worried? Should we be pushing against the people who basically have closed minds? Is it worth the effort? Because early on in Health Watch's history, we decided it wasn't worth the effort. We often wouldn't even reply to them. we have lapsed on that a bit, and we are now doing it. And we decided the most important thing is for those who we could possibly persuade. But what do you think? What's the best advice?
I don't bother to respond. No, I can't be bothered. No, if people have got that view, unless I know them, and I think it's a shame they think that way, absolutely no waste of time, as far as I'm concerned. Give them up. And that's always true. There will be a minority of people who are just fixed. Their distrust is so huge, their scepticism is so huge, there's no point in bothering. But there is this enormous group of people, that is quite a small minority. And there's a big group of people who want trustworthy information, who appreciate it, and who don't want to be told what to do. They want to feel that they're empowered, that they're making decisions, and really deserve, because of the sacrifices everyone's made, to get good information that will enable them to make informed decisions. So no, I don't bother with those. The vaccines is very difficult, because if vaccines were just a personal decision that only affected the person, I would say, well, it's up to them. If they want to risk their lives, that's their lookout. But vaccines don't they affect everybody. And so that's why I've always kept out of discussing risks about vaccines, because it is so complex, because it's not just a matter of, it's not like statins, it's something much broader than that. And so vaccines are difficult, and I think that, there is some, and it is tough on young people whose risk to them is very low, expecting them to get vaccinated, and any risks of the vaccine obviously would be really unfortunate, given that for young people the benefits are not huge. But they are helping everybody else. They're helping their relations, their elderly, their people, because even, we're probably, older people, I'm double vaxxed, I'm still at risk. It's only reduced my risk of death by 95% or something, which is a lot. I'm really grateful to it. It can still happen, as we've shown. The majority of deaths now are people who have been double vaxxed. Now, it's in small numbers, but it's still there. And so I'd quite like, not to be exposed too much to, when I'm riding on the tube, from people who have been. But, that is a big ask, because I'm asking them to do something to protect me.
Yes, but then the same could be said of Typhoid Mary, of course, who gave typhus to large numbers of people in New York, but never suffered herself until I think she was imprisoned in the end. I don't know what they did with her. Maybe we should do that with some of our population as well. No, I'm joking. Questions, thoughts, comments? Yes, please, come on. Now, do we have a microphone? If not, it's just for people watching. I'll repeat it if I may.
I was very interested in your statistic, which said more people who've been vaccinated than unvaccinated have died of COVID. But
No.
surely that's because more people have been vaccinated than
Exactly.
unvaccinated.
So the question is about, why are more people who have died have been vaccinated than not been vaccinated? And that's because so many people have been vaccinated. And the actual risk of dying among the vaccinated is far lower. It's a 20th of the risk of dying, roughly, of the people who've been unvaccinated for each age group, at a particular age. And so, and the arguments we use are things like, well, if everyone had been vaccinated, of course, anyone who died would have been vaccinated. So it's not an indication of the failure of the vaccine. It's an indication of the successful rollout of the vaccine. So, but that's quite a subtle argument. The other, someone gave me the idea, which I've stolen, is about seatbelts. Most people who die in car accidents are wearing seatbelts. It doesn't mean they don't work. It means they're not perfect, and that nearly everyone's wearing seatbelts. But that is quite a subtle argument. And the point is that what I really get annoyed about the vaccine, people, is that they are being manipulated. The people who are still changing taking the headlines and doing things, they're not stupid. They know exactly what they're doing. So people are being really manipulated by the vaccine. I actually don't believe that most of the people behind the anti-vaccine sites I don't believe they're anti-vaccine particularly. They are just deliberate trolls who are trying to stir up trouble.
Yes, please.
Nick mentioned in his introduction the relative failure of medical and nursing schools to teach evidence-based medicine. Would you like to comment on the failure or the success of teaching the understanding of statistics in schools?
Oh, okay. So the question is about teaching understanding of statistics in schools. This is something I feel very strongly about. Statistics and data science, and in what's called, the term now is being used as data literacy. And there's nothing more than this pandemic to show the value of a citizenry that is data literate. Now, you can't expect everyone to say, oh, yeah, I understand why most people who die now have been vaccinated, because that's quite a subtle issue, but they should be able to maybe follow the argument. And so I believe this very strongly, and many people do. The problem is, where does it belong in schools? I don't think it's part of maths. I don't think it's part of maths. Just like, general literacy goes beyond English, it cuts right across the curriculum, basic ability to write and to be able to express yourself. And so I think, and many people are struggling with this at the moment about how this idea of evidence, because it's to do with quantitative evidence or data literacy, it uses some maths, but it's not a mathematical idea. It's a matter of critical thinking and logic and evidence and things like that. And that cuts right across the curriculum. But because our curriculum is so siloed into subjects and GCSEs, it's difficult. Where does it belong? Where does it belong? It doesn't belong in maths. And so it's a real struggle that I think we're stuck with, and a lot of people now are, and I'm on a Royal Society group that's really trying to work out how this might change over the coming 10 years or so.
I'll just come back to just 1 second. There is the notion of life skills.
Yes, yeah. No, exactly. I mean, this could go in with civics and all sorts of things. The fact, being able to take apart a bad story in the news, is the sort of thing we're talking about, and realise the flaws in the argument, the wrong denominator, and all those kind of things. These are just basic skills that everyone should have, or that citizens should have, beyond the academic curriculum. But it's an academic curriculum at the moment, siloed into GCSEs. And so it is a problem where to put it in. Yeah.
Don't teach logic in schools.
Yeah, well, or critical thinking, some of the IB have got a critical thinking course. They've developed that, and which includes logic and things like that. But this is even slightly more than logic. This is this is to do with numbers, really. Which does seem, I think it's an essential skill.
I have an idea, David, and maybe you would be the person to propose it, and I'm perfectly serious, and that is we have a GCSE or an A-level, which is called bullshit. It teaches people what bullshit is. Yeah. And we don't call it civics, we don't put fancy words around it, we just say what it is, and I bet you it would be the most popular A-level that's going. Doesn't appeal to you?
No, I'm not sure. I asked Gavin Williamson.
Please, yes, and yeah.
Do you agree that if the general public really did understand risk, it would be very difficult to run a lottery?
Oh, no, okay. If people understood risk, would it be difficult to run a lottery? Yeah, well, I was a professor for the public understanding of risk, but I retired when I realised I didn't understand risk. And so it was a bit tricky. It is tricky because the lottery is an interesting. I always used it as an example of kind of irrational behaviour. The last time I bought a lottery ticket is when they were going to pay out more, when there was a positive expectation. They were going to pay out more than was going to be put in on the tickets. Of course, I didn't win anything. It gives people a possibility. I mean, if you don't buy lottery tickets, there's zero chance. But the lottery, if it's only £2, it's not the end of the world. It gives some people, there's pleasure from doing it, presumably. And we shouldn't poo-poo people getting pleasure or a little bit of excitement out of activity when it's fairly cheap. So I used to be really scathing about playing on the lottery, and I think I've become a bit less so, partly because I don't think, there are all the adverts about, it could be you and you could win all this and advertising. But in the end, just from experience, people know they don't win. So it's not like a real manipulation. I think it's one of the less harmful bits of, you might call salesmanship of ideas about risks that there are around. There are worse things I think we could try to tackle. Yeah.
Yes, please. Yeah. If you want to speak, just stand up and do, please. You? Yeah.
How does a young scientist find their role in society these days in the context of the modern world? Often when it's easy to take really strident positions or something and get yourself hurt.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that is so how does a young scientist deal with, in a way, the contested nature of modern society where there's a lot of public argument about scientific ideas? That is such a good question. And I'm not sure I think the first thing is to decide, following what I was saying, what are you trying to be? You know, if you decide you want to be an advocate, you've decided what you think is right in the world, and you're going to go for advocacy, well, do it, but you're not being a scientist. You're no longer taking a scientific opinion. You're being an advocate. And that's totally different. A scientific opinion is about evidence. It's about judging the evidence and communicating the evidence and understanding the evidence and its limitations. You are not the policymaker, and I don't feel scientists should be telling policymakers what to do. That's a political decision, and they have to take the consequences for it. So I think, a bit like my 5 rules I put up, you have to decide, first of all, what... You know, we say, first, this is an ethical decision. Are you trying to inform or persuade? Number one. And this is something you have to look inside yourself and decide, what am I trying to do? And I hope that people would feel, I'm genuinely trying to inform people, to empower people to make better decisions, and so that even if they make the wrong decisions, they at least did it on the basis of good information. And I feel that is an ethical position, and you have to decide right from the beginning that that's what you want to take. And if you do decide you want to take it, which I think you should, then, there's wonderful opportunities to write blogs, to go on Twitter perhaps, to get out there. It's just like within the Royal Statistical Society, we've got young ambassadors, we give them media training, and they, now I've written a book, Anthony Masters, he's really young. About 35 years. Anyway, so he's 30. He's a youth, but he's an RSS ambassador, and now he's appearing on all sorts of stuff, and others are doing that. So you can get out there and gradually start promoting through talking to the family, giving schools talks, science fairs, and all that kind of thing. And that I feel it's a deeply honourable and worthy, activity to try to. And the first thing, of course, is try with your family. I mean, if you can explain to your auntie about some of this stuff, you are doing really well. So, I think it's a great question, and I spend my whole time encouraging scientists and statisticians and everybody to actually put their heads up, but be careful and get ready for the flack that will come back. But frankly, if you get up and start telling people what to do, you deserve it. No, don't complain when people criticize you if you start telling people what to do. So I think, work out your ethics and your position and then go for it. And it's a great, honourable activity.
Yes, please. France, can I just see how many other people like to ask questions in the face?
Oh.
1, 2, 3, 4. Okay.
Great.
Yeah, it's one of the things that HealthWatch is very keen on, is using graphics to explain
Yep.
risk. So you have 1,000 little things.
Yeah.
19 of them.
Yeah.
If you give them the cholesterol level, go down to 60.
Yep.
Do you think that's useful?
Oh, brilliant. Okay, the question is about what I would call icon arrays, explaining risk by showing what does it mean for 1,000 people. I mean, if I was giving a standard talk, it would be full up with those. And that our advice when I'm training journalists or anything like that is actually not to talk about risks, not even to talk about percentages, just to say, what does it mean for 100 people? I mean, if I was explaining false positives in lateral flow tests, which I could do, but I'm not going to do it now, it would all be to do with what would it mean if I tested 1 million people. And with icon arrays or numbers and things like that. No, it is proven, multiple experiments, to be a very effective way to do it, and we use it in all our tools. The interesting thing which we have explored, for example, is whether you should use little people as icons or just blobs. And it's important because people we wrote one for women with breast cancer showing survival after different therapies, and we had little women shaped ones that went black when they died or something, and people were completely unacceptable. So we changed the deaths from being black solid to a black outline and changed them to blobs. So you really have to research this thing carefully. Even the image used has an emotional context, and you need to be careful about that. Yeah.
Right. Please.
We've been spending quite a lot of information seems to swing either way on face coverings and masks. Do you think the information we're now being supplied is roughly accurate?
Yeah, face coverings is interesting. I went to one SAGE meeting, and that was on face coverings, and there was a lot of disagreement on it early on. And you know, WHO got it wrong. You know, frankly, the slowness with which the protection went from surfaces and wiping surfaces through to ventilation has been an appalling thing. Dreadful the way that face mask, what was it, face space, something or other. Anyway, fresh air only came in, I think, in March this year, which was dreadful, really slow, given that airborne transmission, you can give it to people behind you, is so important. And I think that, but the problem is the evidence, the direct evidence for the efficacy for face masks is very limited indeed. We haven't got good empirical randomized evidence, because how would you do it? It's very difficult to do. But, there's laboratory evidence, there's all sorts of evidence, and I think now, it's accepted, that it is, an important part of reduction of transmission. But it took a long time, and it's going to be one of the, when we look back on all this, the slowness with which WHO and this government and others changed their attitude towards, away from cleaning surfaces, which frankly, as far as I can see, has been a complete waste of time, through to protection against ventilation and protection will be something that there'll be a lot of criticism about.
Yes.
When we have solid evidence, risk communication probably is not easy but possible, but often we have very poor evidence.
Yep.
And what tools we suggest to communicate risk, but most importantly, what incentives should be there to generate that evidence? Because people who really want to do it, they have no funding, they have no support.
Well, no, that relates to what you said about, what do you do when you haven't got good evidence and how the communication. And if you've got good evidence, you can use all the things we've been talking about, like vaccines, how many people it protects, and there's numbers and everything is beautiful. I love it. For face masks, we haven't got those numbers. You can't draw a little icon or I mean, there's some attempts at it, but it's very rough indeed. So you're much more to do with, the consensus among, not a complete consensus among scientific opinion is that this is beneficial to some extent. You are into subjective judgment about the impact of measures, and that is inevitable, unavoidable. There's no way we can do it. Some things you just can't do. The fact of smoking on lung cancer, there's no randomized trials. You have to use other sources of evidence, and you have to do that. You have to use that and judge it and acknowledge that there is judgment involved, and then have trustworthy sources in order to communicate that information. So I think, and because you try to find out more, but you have to admit, sometimes we don't know the exact effect. I mean, I get asked idiotic questions. Oh, my mother does this. What would be the exact reduction in her risk if she wore a mask when she went on the train? I said, I haven't got the faintest idea. That's a completely unknowable, unquantifiable, virtual quantity. There's absolutely no way this could be obtained. It just doesn't exist as a quantity. So I think that you have to explain to people that just sometimes there isn't great evidence. People do tend to assume that scientists know everything, and they should be prepared to admit they don't know. But in the meantime, this is what we'd recommend.
Right, we've got a question from viewers. Can I ask you one? I promise you something to be very patient at the back, and I'll come to you in a moment. Michelle W., what are David's thoughts on the fact that the CDC has just announced they will revoke the emergency use of authorization for the RT-PCR test, as it doesn't differentiate between SARS-CoV-2 and influenza?
I've absolutely no idea whatsoever. Next question, please.
Well, she wonders if that could explain the magical disappearance of flu in your graph, that the tests weren't picking it up, but actually
No.
emissions rather than
No, I don't think that's to do with that. The flu is easily explained. It disappeared in Australia and South Africa, in all the southern hemisphere over their winter as well. Yeah.
David has to get back to Cambridge. We promised we'd finish about
I don't think it's that large. I should be able to judge that. I don't think it's that large. If you think of it as the sort of lockdown skeptic community, it's vocal, got a lot of followers on Twitter. I don't think it's that huge. Judging by public behaviour and general, enormous, I think almost an over-acceptance of measures because, people are fearful, I don't think it is that large. There will be, oh God, I don't know a number. I should be able to pull out some statistic about, my judgment would be less than that. Yeah, my judgment would be less. My judgment between 10 and 20, but that's completely off the top of my head. Judging by, general scepticism expressed in surveys from ONS about the acceptance of measures, generally the acceptance is above 80%.
Yeah, a lot of decisions in the last 18 months have been made on the basis of models. Given that we're here as guests of an organisation dedicated to exposing charlatans, do modelers belong in the same bucket?
Oh, do modelers belong in the bucket of the modeler? Many of my best friends are modelers, so who am I to say that? No, I think, that is an issue. I think the models, they're the first ones to admit the uncertainty about the models, and so, we should express that. I think they are valuable, they're useful, especially at the beginning. They, their orders of magnitude were pretty good in terms of the warnings about it. But the attempt to sort of micro-model what might happen has been shown through this roadmap. The range is absolutely staggering because the models, just show that there's enormous dependence on things we don't know about. How people will respond, how the contacts will go. We just don't know. And so it gets to while they can give some rough idea of what might happen and perhaps give an idea of what, like a worst case that we have to be cautious about, trying to hold them to a line is absurd. So I think the fact that the modelling is so difficult and so uncertain is itself valuable because it means we don't know what's going to happen. And therefore we have to be ready for a wide range of possibilities. I think that would be how I see it. And there's some good bit, they're really trying hard, they're doing their best, but it is just an intrinsically unbelievably difficult thing to do. And they're the first ones to admit it. When you read their preamble, they essentially say we don't know, almost anything could happen, we don't know, because it depends so much on things we don't know and we can't control.
Perhaps finishing that on that incredibly important note for Healthwatch and for anybody interested in healthcare, which is that we don't know a lot. Humility ought to be a guiding principle. I mean, we might sound, we're evidence-based and all the rest of it, but the fact is the evidence is often flimsy, the evidence often changes, we get things wrong. Doctors gave oxygen to neonates and then discovered they were making them blind. They gave thalidomide to pregnant women and then discovered all the problems they were causing to their babies. We do get things wrong because we don't know everything, and that's quite an important message about the humility of science. It sometimes comes across as arrogance, and it ought to be the opposite. David, what can I say? I'm not going to say anything more other than I'm sure the applause is going to speak for itself, but just in case it doesn't, Susan's going to make sure that it does.
Before you applaud, thank you very much, David. I'm Susan Beauty, the chair of Healthwatch. For anyone who is still on the live stream and for everyone in the audience, don't forget we are a charity. We rely on volunteers and money. If the sound of paper in that little box on the way out or pinging your subscription afterwards be gratefully received. And the reason for that is because we're supporting Healthwatch and the 30 years and many, many prize winners, of which, David, you are our latest in this spectacularly difficult time. You are a spectacularly difficult person who deals with difficult topics, and I would say is very trustworthy. And you are a very, very worthy winner of our Healthwatch Award, which we'd like to thank you with this.
Cool.
Thank you very much.
Lovely.
And please applaud.
Thank you very much.
I'll give you the bag in a minute.
Thank you. Thank you. Yay! I've got my name on it.
I hope we've spelt your name correctly on the gift. And because it's a party and a birthday party, we're going to invite you to cut the cake. And sadly, for anyone who is still watching on the live stream, they will not get the cake and refreshments. For everyone who's here, after we've cut the cake, please, we're going to carry on our discussions next door. But otherwise, I think we have to now move over with this microphone to hear you.
I must say, getting real applause from an audience after a year and a half of total silence is really nice.
Look at this cake.
Just dig a knife into it, bring it down, and they'll do everything else outside.
Oh no, this is going to be a disaster.
It's
Oh,
like
God.
it's almost like being the queen,
But
isn't
it's got all
it?
these flowers everywhere. What do I...
See if you can find a way in.
Okay, I'll find a way in.
Lift the handle up.
It's a
Yeah.
test.
Okay, here we go.
There's a hypothesis
Right,
he's
okay.
testing here,
Okay.
no doubt.
If I slice my finger off, do I get a prize? Are there any doctors in the house when I slice my finger off? Okay, I'm only going to do one slice, so that's great.
Did we get the photograph? You might have to.
I'll do it again if you want.
Thank you very much. So
Right.
happy birthday to us.
Yeah, happy birthday to you. Yeah, lovely.
No, it's a real award for a real person who's really done us proud. And we thank, there's no fee.